Okay, God bless you. We're on our second stream tonight, and we're looking at the Puritan, and we'll get a link to, you can go to the Puritan mind, and the link under the video, you can get the works of Edmund Calamy, or Calamy, 1600 to 1666. So I want to introduce you from time to time to different Puritan writers, to read them and just to encourage you in the things of God, to encourage you in spiritual things. So start to read the Puritans. There's a list of Puritans on Africa Without Borders. If you go to our website, Africa Without Borders, you will find a list of you'll find a list of preachers, Puritan preachers, and yeah, you're going to be blessed. So from time to time, we will be looking at Puritan preachers every now and again, Puritan works. So we're working on John Owen's Mortification, and so let's go into a little bit about Edmund Calamy, February 1600 to October 29, 1660. You can follow me with the article. Go to puritanmind.com. Edmund Calamy, you can follow the article. Edmund Calamy was known as the Elder. He was an English Presbyterian church leader. Of Huguenot descent, he was born in Walbrook, London, and educated at Pembroke College, Cambridge, where his exposition to the Arminianism excluded him from fellowship. Sorry, I got itch again. Excluded him from a fellowship. Nicholas Felton, Bishop of Ely, nevertheless made him his chaplain and gave him the living of St. Mary, Swaffham Prior, which he held till 1626. He then removed to Bury St Edmunds, where he lectured for 10 years, retiring when his bishop, Wren, insisted on the observance of certain ceremonial articles. As we go through his life, he traverses a lot of the big issues that were happening during the Puritans at this time. In 1636, he was appointed rector, or perhaps only lecturer, at Rochford in Essex, but had to leave for the sake of his health. In 1639, he was elected to the perpetual curacy of St. Mary, Aldermanbury in London, where he had a large following. At the opening of the Long Parliament, he distinguished himself in defense of the Presbyterian cause and contributed to the conciliary work known as the Smectymannus, whatever that is, against Bishop Joseph All's presentation of episcopacy. The initials of the names of several contributors formed the name under which it was published: Stephen Marshall, E. Calamy, T. Young, Matthew Newcomb, W. Spurstow. Calamy was an active member in the Westminster Assembly of Divines, and refusing to advance to Congregationalism, founded Presbyterianism, the middle course which was best suited his views of theology and church government. He opposed the execution of King Charles I, lived quietly under the Commonwealth, and was assiduous in promoting the king's return. For this he was after offered the bishopric of Coventry and Lichfield, but declined it, perhaps for his wife's sake. Sorry, I got an itch there. He was made of one of Charles' chaplains and vainly tried to secure the legal ratification of Charles' declaration of October 25th, 1660. He was ejected for nonconformity in the Great Ejection of 1662, and was so affected by the sight of the devastation caused by the Great Fire of London that he died shortly afterwards. He was buried in the ruins of his church near the place where the pulpit had stood. His publications are almost entirely sermons. His eldest son, Edmund Calamy the Younger, followed a similar religious path and was ejected from the rectory of Morton, Essex in 1662. And he was of a retiring disposition a moderate view, and died in 1685. So you've got some of Calamy's books here. The Art of Divine Meditation by Edmund Calamy. I think you have to buy that one. The Covenant of Works and the Covenant of Grace. The Godly Man's Ark. So the whole list of various sermons that you can go and read. Some of them free, some of them you have to pay. But you can see here, you can get the works here. So we'll do this. Watch this now. So here you have a complete collection of farewell sermons, you know. If you remember, Calamy was kicked out of the Church of England, yeah? And many ministers were kicked out of the Church of England, over 1,000. Most of the sermons contained in this collection were delivered on the 24th of August in the year 1662. On that day, the act requiring a perfect conformity to the Book of Common Prayer and to the rites and ceremonies of the Church took place, the effect of which enactment was the silence of nearly 2,500 ministers. 2,500 ministers were kicked out of the Church of England. The death of 3,000 nonconformists and the ruin of 60,000 families, such was the result of the restoration of Charles II of infamous memory. To ascertain the spirit which actuated the ejected ministers, it is sufficient to refer to the following selection of the farewell sermons. So Calamy is in the farewell sermons. There's two sermons of his and also a sermon about his funeral. 2,500 ministers were kicked out of the Church of England. Calamy was one of them. Thousands of people died, and 60,000 families were affected by this. Wow. To ascertain the spirit which actuated the ejected ministers, it is sufficient to refer to the following selection of the farewell sermons, which were delivered at the very moment they were agonizing under the fangs of persecution, but which discovered nothing but a combination of Christian graces. Bishop Burnet admits that many of them were distinguished by their abilities and their zeal. And the celebrated Locke has remarked, Bartholomew Day was fatal to our church and religion by throwing out a very great number of worthy and learned pious orthodox divines. Spurgeon says, these great preachers whose names we remember were men who counted nothing their own. They were driven out from their benefices because they could not conform to the Church of England, and they gave up all they had willingly to the Lord. They were hunted from place to place. They wandered here and there to preach the gospel to a few. Those were foul times, but they promised they would walk the road of fair or foul, and they did walk in knee-deep in mud, and they would have walked it if it had been knee-deep in blood too. But now we are all little men. There is scarce a man alive now upon the earth. Charles Spurgeon. Wow. Ian Merry says this. John Staunton has described the Sunday upon the most of the farewell sermons were preached. No Sunday in England ever resembled exactly that which fell on the 17th of August, 1662, 1 week before the feast of St. Bartholomew. There have been mourning, lamentation, and woe, in particular parish churches, when death, persecution, or some other cause has broken pastoral ties, severed from loving congregations, the spiritual guides. But for many hundreds of ministers on the same day to be uttering farewells is an unparalleled circumstance. In after years, Puritan fathers and mothers related to their children the story of assembled crowds of aisles, standing places, and stairs filled to suffocation of people clinging to open window like swarms of bees of overflowing throngs in churchyards and streets, and deep silence and stifled sobs as the flock gazed on the shepherd, sorrowing most of all that they should see his face no more. It is well for us to bear such a background in mind as we read the following pages. The atmosphere of that day was electric and charged with emotion. The popular discontent was great, and strong guards stood ready in London, but these sermons seem far removed from all that. There is a calmness and an unction and a lack of invective. Great though their sorrow was for their flock and for their nation, they had a message to preach which was more than equal to the strain of the crisis. An eternal God, an ever-living Savior, and a glorious hope of heaven carried them through the heaviest trials. Ian Murray. Wow. And you got Calamy's first sermon there, second sermon in his funeral sermon. And then you've got Bates and Watson and Manton and Benning and Brooks and Collins and Cooper and all these godly ministers kicked out of the Church of England. And here it is, free PDF, thanks to monergism. I'm reading through this book at the moment. I'm on the third sermon, 777 pages of pure delight, pure encouragement to you. You can get this book for free. Read it. Very, very comforting, very, very encouraging, very, very solemn. And there we are. Get the book. So, there we have it. There's a Puritan you can go and study and read. I'm nearly in tears at the wonder of these men who stood for the gospel. The Church of England today, and the Church of England for over a few hundred years now, has been weak. There's been no strength in it. There's been no vigor in it for the gospel. Yes, there have been a few ministers here and there, but especially in modern times, over the last 130 years especially, it's been weak and insipid. It's lacked men of conviction who will preach the word of God and preach the truth. There have been some, but it's been weak. There are few men like these men today. And we need men bold who are willing to preach the gospel. So we finished our second. Michelle, you'll be wondering what's going on. This is our second stream. I hope that you go and read these farewell sermons. I'm in my third sermon. So I'm reading John Owen, Mortification of Sin. So we've done Mortification of Sin, John Owen. I'm reading this book. The collection of farewell sermons. I'm in the third sermon, which I read today. So I hope this encourages you. I hope it encourages you to stand firm, stand strong. They were willing to walk in mud. They did it. They were kicked out of the Anglican churches, and they were told that they were not allowed to go to the town where they were ministers of. They were not even allowed to go into the town. So they had to meet in barns. They had to meet in forests to preach. And, you know, many of them starved to death. Many of these ministers starved to death. 2,500 pastors were kicked out of the Church of England. Many of them died of starvation because they weren't allowed to. You see, if you were a minister in that day, the church where you were at, you got a living. People paid your salary there. So if you were kicked out of the church, you didn't have a salary. So many of these ministers went hungry. Many of them starved. And they were not allowed to go into the town and preach where they'd been kicked out. They had to go and preach in the forest or, you know, in the mountains or in barns. And so may that be an encouragement to us. I hope that stirred you up. I hope that's encouraged you and strengthened your faith. And been a blessing to you today. So we're going to look at my next stream now is Bob the Builder. on the King James onlyism. So that's what we're going to look at now. So over to the next stream. So Michelle, thank you. We're going to go to the next stream. And I hope this has encouraged you. God bless you now.